Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Words on Whiskey, episode 54. And for the first time, we're doing a pre-recorded show. Just things worked against us and we couldn't make it live. So we're doing a pre-recorded show, and our distinguished and well-known and highly prestigious representative of the Forsyth brand, Mr. Richard Forsyth, is our guest this evening. So I'll bring him in now and have a chat. Good evening, Richard.
Good evening.
How are you?
Sergio, and all your listeners.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much. As I said, you have the prestige of being the first recorded guest on our show, which is something different. So, look, we won't be getting questions in from people, which may or may not be an advantage. But one quick thing to clear up: is it Sir Richard Forsyth now?
No, not quite. I didn't get that far, but I did receive an OBE.
Yes.
About 15 months ago.
Yes,
it was last year's Queen's summer list.
Yeah.
So I have an OBE, basically for services to the whiskey industry and our efforts to support our local community here.
Oh, that's brilliant and well deserved. So, tell me, does that make a difference to you? What does how did you feel about getting that award?
Well, to be fair, I never saw it coming. I really did not, and was pleasantly surprised to be nominated.
Yeah.
I have to say, I quite often forget I have one.
Right.
But and I suppose I should get my calling cards, etc., reprinted accordingly. But no, it's a great honour to be recognised. So not only for me, but for the company and for my local community here in Speyside.
Yeah. I mean, did you grow up in Speyside? Are you local to the area? Are you in Roths, is it?
Yeah, Roths.
Yeah.
Roths is a small whisky town, approximately 1,200 people, 5 distilleries. We're based in the heart of the malt whisky industry in Speyside. Mm-hmm. I am indeed born and bred Roths. I'm third generation of the family business, and we do now have a fourth generation. My son is the managing director of Forsyth. Yes. I actually become 70 years old in two weeks' time. So
you're wearing it very well, I have to say.
Thank you very much.
Well, so I mean, you directly have been in the business for 50 years, but if we go back to the very beginning,
actually, yeah.
Wow, you did start early. Okay, so if you take it back to the very beginning, the company was originally Roths, and that formed in 1890. Is that correct?
Well, just to go back, there's actually been a copperworks business in Roths here in Speyside since the mid-1850s.
Right.
And that's, of course, would have been serving one or two of the licensed distillers by that time. But I'm sure was also serving the still many illicit distillers there was in the area. In the 1890s, my grandfather started his coppersmithing life with the then owner, who was a guy called Robert Willison. Yes. He owned the copperworks, and he was quite a big player. He had one in the Central Belt in Scotland, and he also had a copperworks in North England, which was doing copper pipework for the shipbuilding industry.
Right.
So my grandfather started life in the mid-1890s as a coppersmith, and he actually worked at the 3 sites.
Right.
But when Willison came to the end of his business life, he'd no one to leave the company to. So my grandfather bought the Roths branch in 1933. So that's the history of Forsyths coming into the coppersmithing business in the
And was the
Scottish.
coppersmithing, was it for distilleries? Was it for pot stills? Or was
Absolutely.
it, yeah, specifically for that? I know nowadays the company has grown hugely and is involved in a lot of different activities. But, you know, if you were to take a split of between the industrial side, which is kind of the oil and gas, and then the distillery side of it, what way does that split?
Well, right up until 1979, Forsyths was 99.9% servicing the whisky industry. I mean,
Right.
the Scotch industry had seen growth from the late 50s, after the war, obviously, from the late 50s right through until the late 70s. So any any growth that Forsyths had, the Scotch whisky industry was soaking it up.
Yeah.
But we got a rude awakening by 1979 because the whisky industry here in Scotland found they had built up too much stock,
Yeah.
and they had to cut production to get these stocks leveled out. When they cut production, they don't need coppersmithing skills so much.
Yeah.
So we actually had to diversify our company, and it was a big learning curve for us. Too many eggs in one basket and all that sort of thing.
Yes.
So we actually diversified our business through the 80s, working for the likes of the paper. The paper making industry was quite buoyant, very buoyant, in fact, in Scotland and in the UK. And also, of course, the growing and thriving oil and gas industry, which we eventually got into in quite a big scale by the 1990s.
I presume that's fallen down a fair bit, no?
Yes, it has.
Yeah.
But as my, our very basic philosophy after the 1979 crash was, don't have all your eggs in one basket. Make sure you've got options for your business.
Yeah.
So when the oil and gas industry fell away, some 9 years ago,
Yeah.
we obviously had a very buoyant and growing whisky industry, not only here in Scotland, but in worldwide countries, Asia, and of course Ireland. So
Yes.
huge growth in the last 20 years.
Yeah.
So that has kept us going. I mean, we still do quite a bit of oil and gas business, but obviously the last 10, 12 years has been predominantly new whisky distilleries.
Yeah. You mentioned your grandfather, Alexander, who founded the company in 1933. That was then taken over by Ernest.
Yeah, Ernest
Forsyth,
Toots,
your father.
he was well known as Toots. And
Yeah, how did that come about?
Well, it was actually, he was one of 7 siblings, and one of his brothers, who incidentally became a minister at the church, he started calling him Toots at a very early age, and the name stuck with him. I always remember my father saying, I'm only known as Toots from the brewer's office to the boardroom. And many of the whisky industry people never knew his real name as Ernest. It was always called Toots. Yeah.
Okay. And then in the 60s, is it you took over?
Yeah, just
Or you joined?
My father obviously served his time as a coppersmith before the war. He went away to the war, World War II, as many did, and he came back, and he ran the business from the late 40s through to the early 70s. I started off life as a coppersmith, an apprentice coppersmith in 1968.
Right.
And by by the mid-70s, I was actually becoming quite involved with the management of the family business as well. And that's when my father started to go into semi-retirement, if you like. And he eventually retired completely by the early 80s.
Right. Yeah. And tell me, how much did the industry change at a coppersmith level? You know, from, I suppose, from the 1890s right through to when you started and beyond. How much has that industry changed? Is it still a craftsman's role, the coppersmith?
It's still very much a craftsman's role. You know, each individual distillery has its own shapes and sizes. There's nothing uniform with any other distillery. So we have still got to measure up and make for unique equipment for each and every distillery. The most significant changes really in the early days was all direct firing. You know, it was coal-fired pot stills.
Right.
And the cooling methods were the old-fashioned cooling worm in a cup of water. And so the most significant changes in the 60s and 70s was the transformation of going from direct firing to indirect steam heating of the pot stills with internal coils and heating units. And of course, the old-fashioned worm tubs, which were big and really not very efficient. We changed that was changed to the now very modern shell and tube condensers. So that was two very significant changes in the industry.
Yeah. In terms of the welding as well, I mean, originally these would have been riveted, wouldn't they?
Yeah, just like the old battleships used to be, everything was riveted. Everything was riveted. One significant thing in my father's day, actually, when he was in the army, he learned a little bit about welding copper.
Right.
And when he came home, he started to develop the welding of copper. But many of the old distillers were loath to change anything. They didn't want to change shape or size or method of manufacture. So, in fact, we still do rivets for certain customers to this day. But by and large, 95% is all welded equipment now.
Yeah. Do you find that, I mean, you mentioned the worm condensers there. I see a little bit of a trend towards bringing back those worm tub old style condensers. Have you observed that in your business?
There are some very traditional distillers around, both old and new, who want to use traditional distilling and cooling methods. So indeed, we are asked quite a bit to make the old traditional cooling worm, which is basically a copper coil rolled into a certain diameter, and it's submerged in a tank of water. Very basic methods, but very effective.
Yeah. I think, is it a slower cooling that it gives, or?
Yeah, well, distilling, they always say that slow distillations give off a better spirit. So these people who have the time to run their pot stills slowly, I think can afford to use worms.
Yeah. Can I go through maybe some of the clients that you have? I mean, I assume you cover a lot of Speyside, seeing as you're there. But in Ireland, you've gained a lot of business. Obviously, the biggest one, I assume, would be the Middleton Distillery down in County Cork. But I mean, you have gained others as well over the last while. So I think you have Powers Court, you have Royal Oak, you have the new one being built in Mont Strabon, and various other ones.
Yeah.
Does our nature of triple distillation make it more attractive in the sense that you're getting 50% extra equipment required from us?
Well, you could look at it that way. And
Yeah.
you think about it, you go back 20 years. I mean, we have two very old Irish customers, clients, if you like. You're right. One is an Irish distillers in Middleton. We've been doing business with them for, I don't know, the last 30, 40 years. And of course, the other one was up in Bushmills. I mean, we'd been doing business with Bushmills for quite some time. You know, you think about it, when you go back 20 years, there probably only was
only three distilleries. That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you've now over 30 and growing.
We're at 40. We're at 40
You're at
now.
40, are you? Yeah. Well,
so I see you have Sleeve League, and I believe Great Northern as well.
Yeah, we do business with Great Northern. You're right. I mean, we have men in Monaster Evan site at the moment. We have men in the Sleeve League site at the moment. We've just doubled the capacity of Bushmills Distillery in Northern Ireland. And as you know, you probably know, we were very involved with the new garden still house at Middleton. Beautiful setup.
Can I ask you a question about that, actually, about the Middleton in the garden house? Is it true that you recreated some of the dents that had been in the original ones to make them as similar as possible?
No, that is a bit of a myth. If there are dents, and I get asked that in Scotland as well.
Do you? Okay.
No, if there's a dent that's been done accidentally in the old still houses, so we don't quite replicate the dents as such.
Yeah. But are you asked to mimic as closely as possible the existing stills when you go in?
Absolutely. And that is true in any of the old distilleries who have been running for over 100 years or whatever. They perceive they have the best products, so they do not want to change anything in their equipment. So we measure up the old stills and we make exact replicas. And that's true for Irish distillers, for most companies actually. Very true.
And would Irish distillers still be amongst the largest that you produce? I mean, I think they're the largest in the world, and certainly in Europe anyway. But
I always say that Forsyth are actually the biggest pot still maker in the world.
Yeah.
We've made the biggest pot stills in the world, and they are indeed for Middleton Distillery.
Yeah. Could I ask you about then the process of making pot stills, because that fascinates me. I have a manufacturing background myself, and I'm just curious about the process. Obviously, the raw material is copper. Does that come delivered to you then in sheets, and then presumably new technology can help cut the template, and then there's more modern welding techniques that enable you to weld them together, or what's the process?
Yeah, well, our coppersmithing skills stem from taking a flat plate, sheets, which incidentally come from mills in Germany now. In fact, the old East Germany is our main supplier of copper, flat sheet. Copper tubes, which you use for condensers, etc., are still manufactured in the UK in a factory in Coventry in England, actually. But we take the flat plate, and this is where our skills are. We cut our shapes, we roll cones. So we cut, we roll, we weld, we shape by hand beating.
Yeah.
And once that, copper is a very soft metal.
Yeah.
So we have to hammer it for two reasons. One, to put strength back into the formed copper shape, and two, to put a finish on it. So we have a series of power hammers now that we use to carry this out. But all the shaping, all the different shapes that you see in a pot still, are still all shaped by hand with wooden mallets.
Wow.
Yeah.
So the hammering them with the mallets, that tempers the copper in some effect and strengthens much like you would with a sword?
It doesn't, because copper is one of the few metals that when you anneal it,
Yeah.
stays in the annealed state, it stays in a soft state. So,
Right.
and that's why we do anneal it, because we can shape the different shapes accordingly with the wooden mallets. But once we have that shapes, we have to hammer it, and it's like hammering onto an anvil.
Yeah.
And this strengthens copper, it hardens the copper, and also puts a finish on the copper.
Yeah. What kind of thickness are we talking about when the sheets come in, and then when they're formed into their? So is
Well,
it?
it does. It depends on the size and the size of the pot still, but
Yeah.
generally, for a steam heated pot still, the base and flue sheets, as we call them, could be 8-10 mil thick.
All right.
When you
Okay.
come up to the shapes, the shoulder plates, as we call them, it's either 4 or 5 mil thick. So
Right.
it's workable, it's pliable, and once we, as I say, once we have the required shape, we hammer it to harden it and to put a finish on it.
Yeah. One question that I have is, what kind of range of sizes of stills do you deal with?
We'll do anything from a 50-litre pot to a 50,000-litre pot.
Right. Okay. And the challenges then of dealing with the larger ones, is it, its own self pressure supporting
Yeah,
itself?
the physical size is a challenge.
Yeah.
For example, the Middleton pots could not be transported by road. We actually have a factory on the harbour side in Buckie on the Murray First Coast.
Right.
So we actually made the Irish pots on the harbour side in our factory, straight onto a ship, and sailed round to Cork.
Okay.
Now, they were able to transport from Cork to Middleton.
I saw some of the pictures of them coming through the village. Phenomenal.
Quite a sight,
yeah, very impressive. Very impressive. And I assume the final assembly then, you spend a number of weeks in the distillery assembling them, fine-tuning them, and all the rest. Yeah.
We manufacture most of our pots and all equipment for easy assembly.
Okay.
We have distilleries all over the world, in some very remote areas. So it's prudent for us and our customers to make the equipment as easy to assemble on site as possible, to minimize men on site for too long. So we do this very successfully.
I mean, the pot stills are the, if you like, the glamorous, the sexy part of the business. But obviously, there's a lot of supporting infrastructure that goes in. You mentioned the condensers and all the pipe work, etc. You fulfill a lot of that side of the business as well. It's not just the copper stills.
We've probably built 50 turnkey distilleries in the last 10 years. And literally, when I say turnkey, we do everything. The stills, the condensers, the stainless steel receivers. We also have a company who makes wooden receivers. Because some people still ask for wood. But pipework, electrics, all electrics, pumps, valves. We offer the full service.
And does that include things like the monitoring, the automation elements of it, the
Yes,
computerization?
Yeah, that comes under our electrical department. We have a sizable electrical department, some 80 employees in that department alone, and they cover the automation of the equipment.
Yeah. So I saw that you do employ 400 people, over 400 people, I think, across 5 sites in Scotland and 1 in Hong Kong, I saw.
We have an office in Hong Kong. The office in Hong Kong has a process engineer plus a salesman.
Okay.
So, and we picked Hong Kong to centralize because we do a lot in China, we do a lot in Japan, Taiwan, Korea, Thailand, and we thought Hong Kong was the most central position for us to service that customers.
I mean, outside of Ireland and Scotland, what are the most up and coming regions now that you see, and most emerging markets for equipment and for setting up distilleries? I'm talking specifically whiskey distilleries.
Yeah, I mean, America still has growth with the smaller boutique distilleries, some of which are malt. But I mean, the growth markets are definitely Japan, China, that region, Asia region.
Yeah, I do see a lot of growth in the Japanese side in particular now as well. I think
we've built 14 turnkey distilleries in Japan in the last 5 years. 14.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
I saw somewhere there recently in Scotland a whole distillery was basically lifted and shipped to China.
Yeah. To give some credit to my son, we were in Japan three years ago.
Yeah.
And we visited quite a remote region of Japan where they wanted to build a distillery. Now, if we were to build a distillery conventionally, typically you'd have 8 to 10 men on site for 3-4 months just to get everything done. So my son came up with the idea of modularizing the different units. So you have milling, mashing, fermenting, distilling. So he designed the distillery which had about 7 or 8 modules.
Yeah.
In other words, units that could be shipped by container or container size. The advantages, the big advantages, we built them in our factory under very controlled conditions, as you can imagine. And we were able to test all the equipment, wire all the equipment, and again, test it, break it down, ship it out. And it may take 3-4 men, 3 weeks just to plug it all together again on site. Right. Now we built one in Japan very successfully 2 years ago, and we have since just shipped a second one to Inner Mongolia, of all places, in China.
I think that's the one I read, not China.
Yeah, that was quite well advertised, actually. It's so I think it's in the high seas at the moment.
Okay. Like, what's the lead time, or what's the process? So I've decided I want to set up a Irish Whiskey Magazine distillery and going into a venture of setting up. What's the process that I would go through if I was to engage with yourselves to set up a distillery?
Well, hopefully you would come and speak to Forsyth.
Yeah.
You would tell us the size that you wanted, or maybe the literage of spirit you wanted to make per year. You know, whether it's 1 million liters a year or 5 million, litres a year or 10 million litres a year. And then we would size the equipment, obviously, to suit that literage. And then we would cost it, and we would give an assessment of timescale for manufacturing, delivering, and installation. And again, typically at the moment, let's say 1 million litre per year still, 10, 12 months, we could do that in.
Okay.
A bigger one, 5 million litres a year, obviously you might be 18 to 20 months. So that's the sort of time scale.
Do I come to you with a taste profile? I mean, can I say to you, I'm looking for these notes and these characteristics of the whiskey? Are you able to pretty accurately determine what shape still is going to give me that flavor?
Not pretty accurately. And if anybody tells you they can, they're telling you fibs, because there is a lot of mystique to whiskey making.
Sure.
Now we can influence the profile, but we can't guarantee anything. We've had people from Asia, East Asia, coming to us and said, we want to make a B Glenlivet.
Right.
And we say, well, we can't guarantee that.
Yeah.
We can build equipment that would help you make, B Glenlivet's probably considered quite a light spirit.
Yeah.
So we can help profile the pot stills to make a light spirit, for example. But we can't guarantee anybody, and nobody can guarantee anybody, right? This is what you will get.
Yeah.
So we can't influence it. We can sit and discuss it with the distillers, but we can't guarantee anything.
Yeah.
It is very much a mystique. They talk about the mystique of malt whiskey, and it is indeed true.
I mean, what are the parameters? So if you take obviously the main bulge of the still itself, the base, then they take the swan necks and so forth. You might have bulbs and onions in them for reflux and so forth. What are the other parameters then that a customer can come to you with in terms of the still itself?
Well, the main one is reflux. Reflux areas are obviously very important. If you've a huge reflux area, it's obviously going to give you a lighter spirit. If you have a smaller reflux area, there's certain congeners, etc., will go over and help you make a heavier spirit.
Yeah,
but
and then
it's not an exact science.
Yeah. And then the line arms and the angles and the width and so forth.
Well, that's all got to do with reflux.
Yeah.
You can have necks and live pipes which go up the way. That gives you extra reflux. But the bulk of the industry, quite honestly, have the live pipes go down the way. Maybe a swan neck with a 10, 12 degree angle.
Yes.
Can give you, and because you don't want to make your spirit too light. You want some congeners, etc., to go over to give you character.
Of course.
And that's where, we're happy to discuss with any distiller what they want. But if we have a distiller who knows exactly what he wants, it does help our cause as well.
Yes. Tell me, is it possible that the angles of some of these line arms, swan necks are adjustable? Or are they, once it's been built, that's it, that's the shape you have, and it can't be altered?
I mean, we had a certain customer in Thailand who wanted all bells and whistles. They wanted the difference, they wanted swan necks, so they were interchangeable. But it's not an easy thing, because you think about it, you have a swan neck running down the way, and you want it to go up the way. You not only do you change the swan neck, but you've got to change the Wi-Fi, you've got to change the condenser heights. So generally, once the pot still is fixed, that's it.
Yeah. The other thing is copper is obviously a commodity, and we've seen the prices of copper rise significantly over the last few years, particularly lately. How big an impact is that on your business? Or
Well,
uh,
obviously, hugely. I mean, we are sitting at this precise time with a 56% increase in copper compared with 2 months ago.
in 2 months?
Yeah.
Right.
I mean,
Okay.
to be fair, copper was quite low in price.
Yeah.
But to have that jump, 56%, so we have to put clauses into our quotes,
Yes.
or indeed timelines. The quote is only valid for 10, 12 days or whatever,
Yes.
or indeed we can write in clauses, conditions about
Yeah.
the fluctuation. As you say, copper is a commodity. It's on the metal market twice a day,
Yeah.
and if it fluctuates, let's say £100 or €100 from one market to another, it's not too significant. But if
Yeah.
it fluctuates €1,000 a ton,
Yeah.
it's huge,
Yeah, I
and you
know.
can't be
I didn't
bought.
realize. I didn't realize the fluctuations were that big.
They
Um,
can be, and they have been recently.
yeah. Yeah.
I am told actually the Chinese have been buying up all the copper. They've been buying up all the scrap copper, because
Yeah.
that's another thing I should have mentioned. All scrap copper goes back into the boiling pot and is reconditioned, and I think it can be up to 30% of a new copper batch can be recycled copper.
Yeah. I mean, how important is that recycling? How much
I
has your
think it's very
business?
important actually, because uh, there are copper mines out there. Chile is a big copper mining country, for example. But
Yeah.
if you had to have all your new copper come from a mine, I think you'd find huge shortages.
Yes.
So the recycling and reusing of scrap copper is very, very important.
Yeah. One fundamental question, and I guess it gets overseen quite often, is I understand, copper has certain properties that make it perfectly suitable for producing stills. So one is the malleability, I guess, of it, but there are other properties as well that you know lend itself perfectly for distillation. Is there anything else that copper brings to the party that we haven't
Yeah.
mentioned?
Well, my theory, and it's only my theory, but I think copper was initially used because of its malleability, pliability,
Hmm.
easy to manipulate, shape, roll, and I think that's why copper was used initially. But
Yeah.
it became very evident that copper as a metal was very instrumental in the process of making spirit.
Yeah.
Uh, it helps remove unwanted sulfates
Yes.
from the spirit. There was one company, in fact, had a big leaning towards stainless steel, and they built some stainless steel pot stills and condensers,
Yeah.
and they literally couldn't get their spirit to clear because the stainless steel did not remove the unwanted sulfates, etc., within the
Yeah.
spirit. So they very quickly added sacrificial copper, and
Yes.
eventually changed out all their stainless steel equipment back to copper.
I
So
mean, you
that
do
was
see.
sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
So that was a very significant lesson for the
Yeah.
whole of the whisky industry, and well, indeed gave us some confidence of our business continuing
Yeah.
for years to come.
You wonder how it was first discovered. I mean, I'd say the malleability was probably the most significant factor initially, and then all
Yeah,
these properties came out. And I mean, I know silver and there are other metals that have great properties as well, but you're not going to be building silver and platinum pot stills. Not
No.
yet.
Copper is an expensive metal, but not quite as expensive as silver and platinum for sure. So it's a good, and funnily enough, as I mentioned, that it helps remove unwanted sulfates, etc. But that comes at a price, because whilst the copper, the material is doing that, it also wears it down.
Yes.
So, I mean, copper pot stills and condensers do wear, and that keeps us in quite a healthy replacement program as well for all our customers.
Yes, I was going to ask, I mean, the average lifespan of a pot still, I mean, I know there's no 100% accurate answer to this, but roughly, you know, what's the lifespan of a pot still before it becomes just too worn out and too thin in places?
Well, the different parts of the pot still wear at different rates.
Sure.
A very rule of thumb is that the volatile spirit that comes off the first distillation, what we call low wines,
yes,
is quite volatile, and it's quite hard on the copper. So it wears the heads, the necks, and the condensing units of the wash still, first distillation.
Yeah.
And that product has the same effect on the distillation, but at the pot, at the boiling areas of the spirit still. So, you know, for all our regular customers, we actually check the thicknesses of the copper each year. We do annually. And my grandfather and Father's Day, they used to do it with a tapping hammer. They would just tap the copper.
I mean, they can just tell by the sound what it was.
Yeah, they could tell by the sound. Now, okay, we've got ultrasonic testing, which it bears out the tapping method, but also gives you obviously quite accurate readings.
Yeah.
So a rule of thumb for us is, when copper gets to less than half its original thickness, time to think about replacement.
Yeah. And what are the sort of faults you get then? Obviously, I mean, we forget it sometimes that we're dealing with a pressurized vessel here as well. I know there are the escape valves and the safety valves and so forth, and everything is closely monitored. What kind of pressures do we see within these? And again, I imagine it varies hugely depending on the pot still you're using.
Well, for starters, pot stills are not pressure vessels because they're open-ended. You think about it, you boil it up, it goes over, it goes through the condenser, and it runs into an open-ended spirit safe. So a pot still is not. What can happen, a pot still can go into slight vacuum situations, and it can go into slight pressure situations. But really, the pressures would never go above 2-3 pounds per square inch.
Okay.
So let's say it's not even half a bar, quarter of a bar maybe.
All right. Okay.
Pressure, but it can go into vacuum situations, and a vacuum valve in a pot still is just as important as a pressure relief valve. So we always fit the pot stills with both a vacuum and a pressure relief.
I think I've seen images of a pot still which is imploded into itself, and that's from the vacuum situation that occurs.
That's from the vacuum situation.
Yeah.
You know, and they can pull a vacuum for various reasons.
Yeah.
A really cold day outside, and the cold air hits the pot still. That can cause a vacuum.
Right.
So they do need to be protected from that.
So it's much more inward pressure than outward pressure that is the danger.
You're right. We've probably seen more imploded pots than exploded. In fact, very seldom would you explode a pot, but they do quite often implode. Mainly when they're thin. You know, Obviously, a new pot is more robust and can withstand an implosion. But
Yeah.
let's say they've been running for 10, 15 years. The copper's a bit thin, they get a vacuum, and it can implode the still.
Yeah. I mean, you go in and you see the new distilleries, and they're all bright, shiny copper stills, and then obviously over a period of time they start to oxidize and build up this beautiful patina that you see on them. I mean, do people ask for the stills with their patina on them already?
Most of them nowadays ask for them to be clean and lacquered.
Okay.
That's just a case of you acid clean down the copper because it oxidizes, tarnishes as we call it, but it oxidizes. So just for maintenance, for cleaning, etc., they ask for the copper to be cleaned down and lacquered. Now this lacquer will last for 6-7 years.
Okay.
Where you just give it a hose down or a wash down. But some people do like to see the copper naturally tarnish.
Yeah.
But it will. I mean, it would go almost black.
Yeah.
Just with oxidization.
I mean, one of the other properties, obviously, of copper is that it's an incredibly good conductor, and the systems these days are pretty automated, and there's quite a lot of electronics around. Does that cause an issue?
No, not that I'm aware of anyway. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously the electronics now are all revolving around automation.
Right.
But no, there's no issues with the copper as far as that.
I presume heavy insulation and everything like that.
Yes,
So,
exactly.
so you produce the copper pot stills. Do you produce column as well?
Very much so.
Yeah.
We'll produce column for grain distillation, for neutral spirit,
yeah.
for rum distillations, quite common in columns.
Yeah.
We're.
I mean, you're synonymous with whiskey, of course, but there are the other areas. So, what are the other spirits that are produced with your equipment?
Well, you name it.
Really?
Rum, tequila. Well, we have two big contracts for Mexico at the moment, and tequila is made in copper pot stills as well.
Yeah.
So we have quite business in tequila. Gin, of course, very popular. So we make gin stills. Vodka is mainly from columns.
Sure.
But we'll do for any type of spirit.
Yeah. I mean, do you do the cognacs or things like that? Or
yeah, we've actually got cognac stills going through our workshops at present.
Right. Okay.
The principles are always the same. They have slight differences, but the principle of distillation is always the same.
Yeah. Is there anything specific to just whiskey as opposed to the other spirits?
Well, if you speak to any Scotsman, he'll say it's the best drink in the world.
Yeah.
And it is made very traditionally. I mean, the bulk of Scotch whisky is made in a 2 distillation system.
Yeah.
As you know, Ireland is mainly a 3 distillation system. So it tends to make a lighter spirit. And, that's just tradition.
Yeah. I mean, you're in the envious position where you actually can pretty much foresee what way the industry is going in terms of what they're looking for in terms of maybe developing flavor profiles. How is that manifested through, what customers are ordering now? Are you seeing different trends emerging now as opposed to maybe 30, 40 years ago when you...
I suppose we are. I mean, you go back 40 years and, you had your traditional distiller, he knew what he wanted, and you had to make equipment to suit his already well-known product, if you like.
Yeah.
And, if he had a good product, he was frightened to change anything. But we have distillers now who are quite adventurous, and they want to try different things, and we're happy to accommodate them.
Yeah. Overall, in the whiskey sense, and I guess speaking for maybe Ireland and Scotland, are you noticing that people are looking for a more complex whiskey, a lighter whiskey? I don't know, different notes that are attenuated, or is it?
Yeah, always. I mean, the modern world is looking for, all different types of products. But you think about it, I mean, sometimes it affects the shape and size and type of equipment, but in the main, it's all about the ingredients that they use, and maybe the method of their distillation, not quite so much about the distillation equipment itself.
Yes, yeah, but obviously the cooling equipment must play a huge role as well in the flavor that's out there as well.
Well, yeah, cooling. What we've seen in the last 20 years is that the cooling systems are not only coolers, but they are producers of hot water. Now, hot water is energy, and there's many different things, methods being used for using that hot water. For preheating, just for energy saving, all that sort of things.
Yeah, well, I mean, they are essentially heat exchangers, aren't they?
Exactly.
Yeah, so
Exactly.
I think one of the distillers, Slane Distillery, were using the heat exchangers to heat the castle.
Yeah. I mean, we always say that distillation equipment is they're producers of low grade heat, maybe heat at 60, 70 degrees C.
Yeah.
Some people raise that temperature to 90 and actually use it back in the distillation system. But you think about it, 60-degree water would be ideal for heating a castle or offices or whatever. So there's different methods of using the heat that is produced.
Yeah, I mean, how was it for you starting in the family business? And you didn't seem to get any special treatment. I mean, you went onto the floor and you worked as a coppersmith and worked your way up. What was that like? What was the atmosphere like?
I would take that further. Not only did you not get any special treatment, you were probably hit harder, if you like.
Yeah.
My father was quite hard on me, but at the end of the day, it didn't do me any harm. I had a desire to train and be good in my own right anyway. So
was it very manual labor, or was it hard physical labor?
And still is.
Still
okay,
is.
we have certain machines now that help us, but it's still hard labor. Okay, 50 years ago it was harder, but it still is. It is a physical process, and we have young guys in all the time. We train young guys up because we know you need young, strong guys to physically beat these pots into shape.
Yeah. How long is an apprenticeship actually?
Well, apprenticeship is still basically 5 years.
Still 5 years.
Yeah, but like anything else, you get a particularly keen apprentice, he'll pick it up quite well in 3-4 years. And you maybe get some guys who need a little longer, might be 6-7. But that's just the nature of people.
Yeah. I mean, you've been in it for so long, you spend so long, I suppose, on the physical side of it, producing the still. I mean, does it become second nature and intrinsic? You just have a feeling for how much beating is enough and how much turning is enough and how much welding is enough. Does it just become a second nature?
Yeah, without doubt.
Yeah.
If you're doing it day in and day out, you know exactly. I mean, in copper stretches, you know how much copper will stretch, you know how much it might shrink, and that all comes just through experience.
Yeah. I mean, I'd imagine you could probably look at a still and say how many years are left in it, and what the
Yeah,
issues might
yeah,
be. Yeah,
you can assess it by age. Okay, you need to know the production levels it's working at,
yeah,
but yeah, you can tell. And when a still does start to thin, the areas to home in on to
yeah,
check, because they can't get too thin.
yeah. Can you tell me about some of the traditions then there are of what's the word? Christening new stills that go into distillery. I've seen things like they put certain things into stills the first time it's been going through its wash.
Yeah, and some of them in the old days they would boil up heather. They would throw in heather and
Right.
boil it up, and that would just help to, when the new copper is too new, it's really too new.
Yeah.
Um, they used to boil heather just to roughen it up a little, if you like,
Yeah.
uh, and it will settle down quicker
Hmm.
for sure.
I mean, how long does it still take to actually, um, what's the word? Gain character. So I presume what you don't want a perfectly smooth inner, because then you don't get any absorption, you get less contact, you get less characteristics of the copper. How long does it take to break in a still?
Well, a new still, the copper can't be too new, but I don't know, 2 3 weeks maybe.
Oh, is that all? Okay.
Aye,
Yeah.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
quite quickly. If it's working 24/7, 2 3 weeks will settle it down.
Yeah. So look, we mentioned earlier that you got the OBE, and rightly so. You're heading up a very important business and a highly respected business, and giving a lot of employment and keeping a tradition alive, which is fantastic. I mean, I'd like to think that a lot of young people are interested in joining now and becoming coppersmith. Do you get any women wanting to join?
Well, we've no woman in the actual workplace as such,
Yeah.
but we have, we've quite a few women in our process design team, our drafting facility, obviously our finance and administration have quite a few women, but
Yeah.
in the process side, we do have several women
Yeah.
in the design and engineering side of it.
And that's something that would have changed over the last
Oh
couple of
yeah,
decades.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. As in many industries, to
Yeah.
be fair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where do you see it all going, Richard? What's the? I mean,
Well,
are you any closer to retirement? Are you thinking of passing over to your son?
I
And
am
he's running
semi-retired.
it.
You know, you're honoured
Yeah.
getting me here at 7 o'clock at night, but um, I mean, I'm still very active. My mind's still very active.
Yeah.
I like to know what's going on, but I am a semi-retired chairman. My son is very firmly into the managing directorship of the company,
Yeah.
and things are going pretty well, to be fair.
Yeah.
So
Does
I
it
will
still
just
excite you as an industry? Do you still get up and feel excited about the whiskey
absolutely.
business? Yeah.
I was up at 5 o'clock yesterday morning to catch a flight to Islay. As you know, Islay has 10 distilleries,
Yes.
and I went to meet a gentleman there yesterday. Unfortunately, I got up at 5 in the morning to catch a flight,
Yeah.
which was cancelled because of fog. That's
Right.
just typical,
Yeah.
but that's life.
Yeah. Yeah. Is that the Ahado one? The latest
Um,
one there?
Ardnahoe is the latest
Ardnahoe,
one.
sorry, yeah,
You know
Ardnahoe.
that, but there's more. There's more in the pipeline.
Yeah, I heard there's one more,
Yeah,
and yeah, I'll get over to visit Islay. So I must come over to Speyside as well. I mean, yeah,
yeah,
it's
you're very
long.
welcome.
Yeah, yeah, it'd be fascinating to see actually the process. Have you any interesting stories of what it was like working on the floor? I'd imagine there were nobody ever got welded into a pot still and left there overnight or anything like that? No.
Yeah, I do remember. Let's just say a very portly Stillman at. It was actually at Glenlivet, and he was in. They used to have to go into the still to clean it, to scour it. They called it.
Yeah.
And he actually, his body swelled up when he was in the pot just with the heat.
Oh.
And he couldn't actually get out of the man door.
Oh no.
And they had to hose him down, get him cooled down, and pull him out. Now that must have been quite frightening for him.
I'd imagine so. Yeah, it's not.
But
Although,
there's loads. I could sit here all night and tell you stories.
wow. Well, I'd imagine it might not be too bad if the still was full of. So long as you weren't in the wash still, and you were in the last still, it might not be too bad, you know. But look, it's been. I could actually talk to you all night. So many questions. Where do you see the industry going? Is there anything technologically coming through that's going to challenge distillation as it stands at the moment?
Yeah,
or
well,
are we?
You know, we're in an age where all the talk is about environmentally friendly fuels and all the rest of it. So there's a lot of exciting stuff being talked about: heat pumps, hydrogen fuel.
All right.
Know, and that will all be developed, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, the whiskey making is still quite traditional. The actual process of making the whiskey will not change or shouldn't change. But okay, there are these periphery things like new fuels, cleaner environment. You know, you think about all the distilleries 40, 50 years ago were coal-fired.
Yeah.
Just a coal fire underneath the pot.
Yeah. And it's funny to see some. I mean, you see it a lot more, obviously, in the smaller, what they term as craft distilleries, where you might have some direct heat and you might have some worm tubs and some of the older technology. But I think for large scale production, I mean, they're going to have to look at new technologies, aren't they?
Absolutely. I mean, you think about the big producers, Diageo, Chivas, William Grant's, where they're making 50, 60 million litres per year or whatever. They've got to be efficient.
Yeah.
They've got to, for making blended whiskies like Johnny Walker or Chivas Regal or whatever. They've got to be efficient.
Yeah, we mentioned that Ireland, you're doing a fair bit of business, or you're doing a lot of business in Ireland. Is there any possibility of setting up? I think you do have a presence in terms of an office in Ireland. Is there any likelihood?
Earlier this year, well, as I mentioned earlier, 20 years ago there was three distilleries. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you're telling me there's now 40.
Yeah.
It was obvious that Ireland was ready and crying out for a trained coppersmith to be based in Ireland to help them with their maintenance and servicing, etc. Yeah. And we felt that there was an opportunity there, so we have actually set up a small unit in Kells.
Okay.
Now we picked Kells basically because it was in the middle of the country.
I mean, don't get much more central.
You've got Middleton right down in the south. You've got Bushmills right up in the north.
Yeah.
And you've got Tullymore, and you've got, well, you name them, there are 40 of them. Yeah. And then you've got Dingle away down there as well. So we just picked a central area which was close to good roads. I mean, you've got great roads in Ireland, a great road system now. So that's why we plumped for Kells.
Yeah.
So he's actually a nephew of mine, Ben Whitlock, is based in Kells now, and many of our Irish customers used to ask for him by name anyway. So we've got a good relationship. We're getting a good response from our customers, in the fact that we've set up in Ireland. So it's all very positive. It'll take a wee while to build up, but I'm sure it will.
Yeah. Well, best of luck with it now. It'll be great
Thank
to
you
see.
very much.
I mean, you're without a doubt considered the Rolls Royce, if you like, of pot stills, and the reputation and the heritage is there. Quick question then, in terms of, you opened a hotel.
Yeah.
That's diversification.
Probably the worst commercial decision I've ever made in my life, but I didn't
Is there
open
any
a
link?
Any
link to coppersmithing or the stills in the hotel? Or
we've been based in the old station yard. I mean, you know, our railway system was closed down in the mid-60s, so we had a redundant station yard. We moved here in 1972, and we've built our whole business up in the old station yard. Like many stations, we had a station hotel to cater for all the railway passengers at that time.
Yeah.
And it was deteriorating and eventually closed. Now it was the entrance to our company, to our family company here. So we decided to buy the hotel, renovate it, and quite honestly, it's for the use of our customers, both at home and overseas, and it's well used. I know for a fact that it's fully booked tonight. We have Americans in there. I have a very experienced barman in there. He's doing whiskey tastings for them in there tonight. So it's actually an extension of Forsyth's business, if you like, just looking after our customers.
Do you have official tours?
No, we don't. We've very strict health and safety policies because it's still very physical and manual operation in there. Yeah. So we're not open to the public for tours. Well, we will do dedicated customer tours. Yeah. Obviously, if they need to see their equipment.
Okay, well, I have to buy a still then and organize something. But
okay, you do that.
One thing I wanted to ask you: is there a favorite whiskey that you have?
Now that's a leading question, but I used to be a big whiskey drinker when I was younger. I like my glass of wine now, actually, but I used to drink whiskey, and the heavy ones were always my favourites, like Aberlour, Macallan. You know, I did enjoy the heavy ones against the lighter ones, but I'm getting too old for that. A nice glass of wine does me nowadays.
No. One final question is, you've obviously got the regions of Scotland there. Is each region asking for a particular type of still, or is that gone now? People from the Highlands can ask for one type of still, and Islay can ask for another, or the same, or is it regionalized?
Most of the Speyside whiskies are probably generally considered heavier. Right. But you've got what we call lowland whiskies, and they tend to be lighter. In fact, we've got triple distillation in the lowland distilleries. Take Auchentoshan, for example. Yeah. Glenkinchie. I mean, they're lowland whiskies that tend to be lighter, and then you've got the famous Islay whiskies, which tend to be peaty. Yeah. But that's more processed than equipment again,
Yeah. Okay, I was just wondering, was there a particular, I mean, I know there are other regions, but I don't know how well defined they are still to this day, if they're strictly, does Islay necessarily mean peaty, or, does Speyside necessarily mean heavier still, so forth, heavier style. Richard, look, all I can do is thank you so much. I have so many questions. I could keep going on, and I'd love to hear some of the old stories and some of the stills. But hopefully we'll get to meet. Yeah, I'll have to come and visit you, and perhaps on your next visit to Ireland, we'll catch up. Or your son is Richard Ernest, is it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Richard Ernest.
After his grandfather.
Yeah, very good. Well, look, we wish you continued success. It's a fantastic family business, and it's great to see you kept the tradition and moved with the times as well, and are keeping young people employed also and keeping the tradition going. So we're very grateful. Thank you for coming to Ireland and helping the industry out here as well. And wish you the very best of luck in the future.
Thanks very much indeed.
Sláinte. Take care.
Yeah.
Thank you.